Hello everyone, and welcome to this really exciting webinar entitled Using Translations to Connect with Culturally Diverse Audiences in Aged Care. Firstly, thank you so much for your interest in this important topic as it relates to communication, as it relates to human rights, as it relates to the way in which people express themselves within the aged care service sector. So it shows your dedication and commitment to caring for older people, their families and advocates. My name is Lisa Trebuzio, and I'm the manager of the Centre for Cultural Diversity in Ageing. And it is an absolute delight to run this webinar today in partnership with Costa Vasili, who's the CEO and founder of Ethnolink Language Services, and we'll be introducing Costa shortly. The Centre for Cultural Diversity in Ageing is funded by the Department of Health, and our broad vision is that all aged care consumers in Australia experience inclusive and accessible care. We do diversity advice and consulting, training and capacity building, such as multilingual resource development, practice guides, and of course our inclusive service standards, which have been recognised by the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. We like to celebrate good practice, and we also like to collaborate with the aged care sector around how do we become innovative. How do we promote inclusive services? How do we look at the voices of culturally and linguistically diverse older people and their families within the aged care sector, even if it's that one person within a residential care facility that has a language other than English? How do we support that person to feel safe? And of course, the Centre for Cultural Diversity in Ageing is funded, I've mentioned, by the Department of Health, but it's through the Partners in Culturally Appropriate Care program. So the centre is the Victorian provider, and there's a provider in each state and territory. So we encourage you to look on the PCAT website for your provider in your state and territory. So now I'm going to pass it over to the main superstar of the day, and that is Costa Vasili, the CEO of Ethnolink Language Services. Costa is the founder and CEO of Ethnolink, a translation company on a mission to connect Australia through language. Costa is a second-generation Australian and grew up hearing stories from his father about the challenges he faced when he migrated to Australia at the age of 13. I'm going to cry, sorry. Inspired by his father's struggles, Costa embarked on a mission 10 years ago to help improve the lives of migrants by providing high-quality translation services to the government and non-for-profit sectors. So over to Costa. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Lisa, for that fantastic introduction. And I have to say, even I feel like I'm getting a little bit emotional with that introduction. I'm really excited to be here today to deliver this training for the audience who have graciously made themselves available for today's webinar. Our program today is a webinar that aims to equip staff working in the aged care sector with knowledge, skills and tips in creating effective translations for their consumers. And breaking this down a little bit further, what this entails will be the following topics today. So first and foremost, how do we choose languages for a translation project? How do we actually make the most of our translation budget, considering that obviously organisations do have limited funds and there's always challenges when it comes to budgets. So how can we actually make the most of that? How do we actually choose an effective mode of communication for our audience, if that's written, audio or video formats? How do we actually develop content for our audience? And then finally, how do we actually get that content in front of our audience? Just a little bit about Ethnolink and why you should even be listening to me today. It only just occurred to me when Lisa was doing her introduction that, yes, this year is our 10-year anniversary when I founded Ethnolink in 2011. And it just occurred to me that I've been spending 1/3 of my life actually in this sector. So I dare say I feel like I know this topic and this area quite well. And I'm really excited to be able to contribute to this conversation in the aged care sector, because I do have a very strong view that translations and making information accessible for people in their native language is certainly something that we have to be doing here in Australia and as a society to move forward. So a little bit about us here at Ethnolink. Like I said, we were established in 2011. We've undertaken over 6,000 projects for government and not-for-profit sector organisations across Australia over that time. And we do specialise in an area of translations called community translations. And what this effectively means is it's translations that are delivered for people in the community here in Australia. So we work closely with organisations to help them communicate their message in whatever language, in whatever format. We are a panelist on the Creative and Digital Communications panel, which is the preeminent federal government panel for suppliers of translation services in Australia. And we are also on the New South Wales Government Advertising Digital Communications Services Scheme, and also a number of other panels. And on the bottom of your screen, you'll see some of our fantastic team who I have to say I wouldn't be able to do what I do every day without their fantastic support and the support they give to our clients. So they're some of the people who are working day in, day out with our clients on these fantastic projects that we do. And what do we do? Well, we've recently broken this down into a few different categories, areas to help show our clients what specifically we do. Because when we typically think of translation, we just think of some words on a page in English or in another language and then converting that into a language. Well, we've actually broken that down into being quite a more robust service offering. So first of all, we do multicultural communication. And that really starts with research and understanding our audience, testing those messages with our audience, marketing that message to help make sure that it reaches the right people, and adapting content as needed, because it's not always just around translating the word, but it's actually translating the meaning. And how do we actually translate this meaning within the context of someone's culture, which can certainly change the dynamics of that message. In terms of our core language services we provide, so yes, of course, we provide translations, and we work with NAATI certified translators. NAATI is the accrediting body here in Australia for translators and interpreters, and provides credentialing in many, many languages, as well as recognition in languages that they don't provide credentialing in. We also provide website localization, which effectively means translating a website and localizing that for the user's experience that's native to them. We also provide typesetting services, which is where you make a beautiful English brochure, fact sheet, or flyer or poster, and you turn that into a beautiful Arabic, Chinese, French, Greek, Italian flyer. And that's the type of work we do. Like I said, we work with certified translators as well. And the last component, which we've been doing a lot more work in over the past few years, has been in video and audio localization. And what this involves is really transforming video content into any language. And that can include subtitles. So that's verbal spoken word written on the screen, as well as voiceover in language. And what that means is that we'll actually replace, for example, English voice in the video with the target audience's preferred voice. And as well as that, we also transcribe audio and video files, meaning if someone's got an interview between two people in video audio format, we'll actually, we can transcribe that in that, so for example, a Greek conversation between two people into Greek, and then we can translate that into English to make it accessible for the people who are trying to decipher what was being said. So our areas of speciality, well, I'm really proud that we work across a very diverse range of areas across the government and not-for-profit sectors. Like I said, federal, state and local government. We have a fantastic opportunity to work in the disability sector, doing some fantastic work to make information accessible for those people. We do, of course, work in the aged care sector, mental health, women's health, basically anything around health and social services, and making information accessible for people in the community. And so here we can see just some of the clients we've had the pleasure of working with over the many years that we've been working in this sector. So you may have come across this term, and for many of you may know this term, CALD or cold, depending on your pronunciation. And so I really like to start each of these training sessions with an actual explanation of this acronym, because you may have come across it, you may be familiar with it, but some of you won't be. And because I do refer to it in the following slides, I think it's really important that we talk about this topic here. So what does this CALD actually mean? So in Australia, it's essentially a government construct as a term to help talk about a group of people who come from very, very diverse cultural backgrounds. So hence the culturally diverse backgrounds, and linguistically, meaning that people can have different cultures but also speak different languages, hence linguistically diverse. So together we have culturally and linguistically diverse audiences or people. So people from CALD backgrounds ordinarily have migrated to Australia from overseas at some point in their life. They may speak a language other than English. They represent different cultural backgrounds and may have various religious beliefs. The one thing I like to point out when it comes to CALD is that typically people don't associate or identify as CALD. So people don't go around saying, hey, I come from a CALD background. They're going to say, I come from a Greek background or an Italian background, because it's not an identity that we have. It's more of a government construct that we use to try to talk about a group of people who are very, very diverse. So in preparation for this training today, I with the help of the fantastic Lisa, we were able to put together some numbers that are really relevant to the aged care sector. So 20% of Australians aged 65 and over were born in a non-English speaking country. That's 1 in 5. You know, you think about that. We tend to have this thought around Australia being a reasonably monolingual country, but actually, in fact, as the numbers say here, 1 in 5 Australians aged over 65 were born in a non-English speaking country. And that just speaks with the diversity in this country. 37% of Australians aged 65 and over were born outside of Australia. So this is inclusive of countries where English is the predominant language or the official language. And finally, and this one's really quite an interesting stat when you dig into it, over 200,000 Australians aged over 65 speak a language other than English at home, and they speak English not well or not at all. Effectively, what this means is there's around 200,000 people in Australia who speak a language other than English at home, and their English isn't very good, or they don't speak English at all. And that, when you think about that in the context of aged care and the sort of isolation that one could potentially be exposed to in this situation, it's really quite a startling number. And an interesting observation from colleagues in the sector around these numbers is that they are most likely underrepresented, meaning that this 200,000 is probably a little bit lower than what it actually is. And the reason for that is this data comes from the 2016 census, and the census itself has some accessibility issues because not everyone the census is conducted in English, and if you don't have some assistance in that to fill that out, or you may just not engage with the system, or you might find it too challenging, you may not fill out the census. So therefore, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds are more likely to not partake in the census. Therefore, their answers are not likely to be showing up in the data. So that's just something to think about as well. So what we're going to be going through today is the following questions effectively, and this is how we approach our translation projects for Ethnolink. So the first question that we like to ask is, what is our objective? So the second is, who is our audience. In order to know who our audience is, we have to think about what we're trying to achieve. The third is, how does our audience consume content? 4, what content should we produce? And 5, how do we get our content in front of our audience? So when I talk about this 5-step process, it's a very simplistic model, right? There's a lot more to it. But what I like to point out is that typically people come to us and they're really already at stage number 4, which is what content should we produce? And they actually are trying to work out the first 3 steps afterwards. And what we say is, hang on a minute, let's start from the beginning. What's our objective? Who is our audience? How does your audience consume content? That's the insights and research that you're trying to obtain. And then you think about what content should we produce. And then finally, like I said, how do we get that content in front of our audience? And that's what we're going to be going through today. So what is our objective? You'll see through this training today that I like to use a lot of examples because that's the way I learn, and I hope that others in the audience learn this way as well. So here are some good examples of an objective. First of all, it's better to have an objective than none. At least you've had some thought around what you're trying to achieve in this process. A lot of the work in the past 12 months we've been doing has been to dispel myths about COVID-19. Or it could be to improve awareness of family violence at a specific hotline number amongst people from CALD backgrounds. Or it could be, a relevant example, to increase CALD consumers' satisfaction with our aged care services. But if we actually move a little bit further from this and we actually think a bit deeper, we can actually create a bit more of a meaningful objective or a meaningful goal. So we can do one better here, and we can say, we want to increase CALD consumers' satisfaction with our aged care services by 20% by December 2022. And so you probably come across this concept before of a SMART goal or a SMART objective, which is essentially, this objective should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And so in this example that I've given you here, to increase CALD consumer satisfaction with our aged care services, well, it's specific. We're talking in specific terms here. We're not being ambiguous. It's relevant. Well, the only way we know if it's relevant is if it's in the context of our organisation and what we're trying to achieve at an organisational level. There's no point talking about this as an objective in a completely unassociated industry that have different objectives. The measurable piece is really important because once we define what our objectives are in terms of measurement, we can do evaluation at the end of the campaign or the project to see whether we've achieved what we were trying to make out. And the last part is let's put a time-bound date on this so that it's not indefinitely, it's not in 50 years from now, but we're trying to achieve this in a specific amount of time. Why I put achievable there with the question mark is because I can't answer that for you if what you're trying to achieve is achievable or not. You know your organizations well, and you will know what needles can be moved in a specific amount of time. And, we can apply some common sense thinking to this, to achieve satisfaction increase of 90% in the next 30 days is probably going to be really tough. But if we put that out over a longer period of time, it's probably more achievable. So who is our audience? Well, people often come to us in different situations. So one is where an organisation really has no idea who their audience potentially could be. And that typically could be someone in, say, a government organisation. And what they're really saying is, look, we're trying to reach everyone in Victoria or everyone in Australia from these diverse backgrounds. So how do we actually find out who these people are, what languages they speak, when do they come to Australia? And really, when it comes to that, we're talking about external sources, which is at the bottom of your screen here. So that's data sources such as the census data, which is the last census was done in 2016. And then there's actually a census in this year, in October this year. And the results of that, or the data, will start to come through in early 2022. And also settlement data. And settlement data comes from the Department of Home Affairs, and that data set really deals with recent settlers here in Australia on various visas, including humanitarian visas, family visas, and working visas, skilled migrant visas. But for many of you, you're trying to find out who your audience is, maybe right in front of you, and that could be through two ways. It could be from within your organisation in terms of anecdotal evidence, knowing the residents that you're dealing with day in, day out, and you know the makeup of that, but also data that you're collecting internally. That could be through some forms or intake forms when you have a new resident, or through other data collection mechanisms that you have already established or set up in place. Now, if you're stressing out thinking, well, we don't have a lot of data on this type of topic, so who do we know? What's our audience? Where do they come from? What languages they speak? I just say start collecting. If you start collecting today, it's going to make 12 months from now a lot easier, because you're going to have a better understanding of who you're trying to target. And the other thing is, if you might also start to think about external sources, because you might have an aged care home in a specific suburb, and by using external data, you can get a makeup of who in this area that around us, what languages they speak, what countries have they come from, when did they come to Australia, and that gives you a bit of a sense. You can start to plan out the future and the future needs of your audience. So I've pulled this data, which is for today's presentation, which is the top 10 languages spoken in Australia by people aged 65 and over who speak English not well or not at all. And what I've done for you is we have pulled together the last three census in this results here. And the reason I wanted to show you this is so you can actually see the change in makeup of people aged 65 and over who speak English not well or not at all. And as you can see, and for many of you may already be familiar with this, there has been a decline in the past by the Italian speakers here in Australia in this cohort. Greek has sort of started to flatten off in the past 5 years. But we are seeing also some languages where the language needs are increasing. We're seeing Mandarin significantly increasing. We're talking from 120,000 in 2011 to 12,000 to 23,000, which is nearly double the amount of speakers. And I dare say once we see 2021's results, that's going to continue to increase. You also see an increase in Cantonese, Vietnamese, Arabic, and a smaller increases in Macedonian, Spanish, Croatian's reasonably stable, and Serbian slight increase as well. And this type of data, this is sort of just the tip of the iceberg. This is what I've pulled together for today, but you can slice and dice these external data sets in whatever way you need in order to understand your audience. Here's a different example. This is the top languages of recent migrants aged 65 and over. And you can see it's broken down here in the humanitarian, family and skilled visa migration streams. Now, why I like to show this to people is because what you actually find is that humanitarian visa entrants typically have a higher language support needs, because they typically speak English at a lower level than family or skilled visa entrants. Skilled visa is actually, they have high English language skills typically, because that's usually a component as part of their visa into Australia. And family sits somewhere in the middle. They have a various language needs. So what are some of the ways that we can think about choosing languages for cold engagement campaigns? Well, we think about the age. So it could be people 65 and over. You might be thinking 75 and over. And that can actually sort of change things quite dramatically in terms of things like digital literacy. When you're thinking about how you engage with different audiences within 65 and over. The gender could be a specific gender as part of a potential health, like a women's health campaign that you're trying to achieve. The language spoken, the proficiency in English language, which is really, really important. And the best way I like to demonstrate this is to tell you my own family's story. So every year, every 5 years when the census comes around, my mum, I remember growing up, she would always fill in the census and fill it in for us at home as well. And she would tick, what language do you speak at home? Greek. So that means that my mum comes up in the data as someone who speaks Greek at home. But the important thing to know here is that my mum was born here in Australia and English is her first language and Greek is the language she speaks at home. Now, if you don't wrap this around English language proficiency data, you're actually going to have an overrepresentation of people in that data thinking, oh, we need to produce all this information in Greek for someone like my mum, but my mum would be unlikely to read in Greek. She would prefer that in English because it's her native language. It's a really important thing to distinguish here. Next, we also have literacy in native language, and this is really hard to come by in terms of externally validated data. So it typically comes from engagement with the community to understand their literacy in their native language. And that can depend, again, on the age, when they came to Australia, what education level they attained before they migrated to Australia. So we also have location. You can slice and dice data in, by council area, suburb, city, state, the whole country as well. Arrival in Australia, that can be really important. Is someone a more recent migrant or a refugee, or have they been in Australia for quite some time? Country of birth, of course, very important as well, and highest level of education. And one practical tip here just to keep in mind is when you're thinking about your audience, think about it in terms of the communication product that you're trying to deliver, not just your whole organization. And what I mean by that is you might be trying to target a subset of your whole organization's community. That could be, women 80 plus who have been in Australia for 40 plus years. And that might give you different languages based compared to, say, your whole organization. If you were just looking 65 plus, and that's it. You can get actually different languages. And that can be really important when it comes to health messages, to make sure that you choose the right language for each health message. So here's a real world example of how you can use this data to understand your audience. So here's something that we've pulled from the census data. The objective here, just a very simple hypothetical, we want to help improve understanding of COVID-19 for older people in Melbourne. So, all right, we've pulled this at 70 plus age bracket, all genders. We've put a filter to say that the English language proficiency is low or none, and the location is Greater Melbourne. And you can see we've got this in 5-year age brackets. So it's actually, you can see the difference as you go through the age brackets here, 70 to 79, 80 to 89. So they're in 10-year brackets, and then 90 to 99 and 100 and above. And that sort of gives you some insights into how you can use this data in a real world setting. So one concept we like to talk about here at Ethnolink is this concept of reach and need. And to our knowledge, it's something that it's a construct we've come up with here at Ethnolink. I'm sure other people talk about it in academic terms, but this is a really simple model, very binary model, which is reach versus need. And what we mean by reach versus need is reach languages typically come up very high in data, meaning, oh, we've got lots of Greek speakers, lots of Mandarin speakers, lots of Cantonese speakers, so let's produce information in these languages. However, if you think about this, if everyone took that approach, just taking the top 5 languages, top 10 languages, you're going to have a very, very isolated group of people who speak different languages. And they can be, in a lot of cases, they may be from refugee or recent migrant communities. And the challenge here as well is that established communities typically have more established support systems around them. They might have a lot of established community networks, information material available to them, social groups established, everything like that. Whereas some of the more recent communities that have migrated to Australia may not have that. And so you think about how isolating that can be without people actually prioritising the development of in-language resources for them. It's actually a really, really challenging situation. So what we try to say to people is, yes, think about, how many people you can reach with your material by thinking about some of the top languages, but also think of it through another lens, which is who are the people that really aren't getting supported, who are usually forgotten about, where they might need that support, where they need additional information, where they don't have a lot of family members to support them. And then when you think about it like that, we can see some different languages, and they are in these what we call rare and emerging languages, although they're not typically that rare or emerging. It's just the way that we describe them. They're usually coming through recent migration patterns. So our practical tip here is always to consider reach and need when you're thinking about your languages, and try to strike that appropriate balance. So you might be wondering, wow, all this data, it's just gone right over my head. I know you can feel like that sometimes. So I wanted just to explain how you can actually get that data. So first and foremost, you can always go to a tool called the ABS Census Table Builder tool. That's a self-service tool where you can actually go and build your own tables. You can pull data in, you can drop a filter in, and you can put a row or a column. For more of the tech-savvy data nerds like me, I'm pretty proficient at it, and as well as our team here at Ethnolink. But for many people, it's just way, way too complex, and it just, it's very intimidating. So that's why I thought it's very important to mention that we actually provide complementary language and cultural advice to anyone, even if you're not a client of ours here at Ethnolink, which means if you come to us and you say, we want to understand a particular audience, people in our area, we're thinking about doing some translations, we just don't know who to reach, you can always just come to us here at Ethnolink, and we can pull a custom data report for you based on your criteria. And like I said, that's a no charge, completely complimentary. And as I was explaining to Lisa the other day, the reason that we do that is that we understand that it's so critical that we get the audience right, that we actually understand who we're trying to target, that we've identified that as such a strategic priority that we're just happy to do that as a complimentary service for people. So please do feel free to reach out at any point if you're interested in that. But otherwise, you can always, like I said, use the self-service ABS Census Table Builder tool. Awesome. So how does our audience consume content? So just to summarize where we're at, we've thought about what's our objective, what are we trying to achieve? We thought about who is our audience, and we've looked at how do we actually understand who our audience is, including external data as well as our internal data and anecdotal evidence. So it leads us to how does our audience consume content? Wow, where do you even begin when it comes to how do people consume content? And if you actually think about your own patterns with how you consume content, think about how that's changed over the past 5, 10 years, however many decades in your life. That changes over time. It changes as technology changes, of course. It also changes as people are at different stages in their life and they use different communication tools. So I just want to run through how some people do consume content. And some of these are more relevant for different people, from different cultural backgrounds, from different ages. So let's just run through them all. And so first and foremost, on the top left, we see social media. So we've got Facebook, Twitter, those type of social platforms, TikTok, which is relatively new, and I'm still a little bit confused how that works, which maybe shows my age. I'm not a teenager. These social networks, and this is a way that people consume content these days. People also use these messaging platforms like WhatsApp, or it could be Viber, or WeChat. WeChat's used very, very much so in China, and Viber is used in specific countries as well, and it's more popular than WhatsApp. And people actually communicate one-to-one with each other. They communicate one-to-many in a group, and they share information. Just before this webinar, I just shared an article with a group of friends of mine in a WhatsApp group. I didn't even think about it. It's just second nature now. And people also consume content through YouTube. What a phenomenon. Like YouTube, you can go and learn anything. It's a dangerous tool, but it's a very exciting tool, and people actually use YouTube to learn, as well as other video platforms. And of course, how do people access these tools? Well, they access them through laptops, computers, tablets, phones. What an interesting world we live in, where we've got a mini computer in our pockets, where we can access everything, which leads us to email. How many email newsletters are you subscribed to? Again, email is a one-to-one messaging platform as well as a one-to-many. So you can be subscribed to a newsletter and that's getting pushed out to 10,000 people. And like I said, in the center of this slide today, we've got just different people here, right? Like we've got different ethnicities, different cultural backgrounds, different ages, and people consume content differently. Just depending on their makeup and also their preferences. Whilst some people are just at different stages. Some people are more digitally literate than others at the same age. So we've got hard copy, written letters and forms like this. We have brochures, we have flyers and fact sheets, posters, CDs, books, videos, radio. My grandparents, I still recall them turning on the radio every day and listening to the Greek community radio. That was where they got their information. Or walking down to the local milk bar and picking up the Greek newspaper, or sending me down as a kid to go pick up the newspaper for them. It changes over time, but certain people access content differently. And of course, TV. And other digital streaming services now, where we're actually consuming content. So really the troubling thing with this content is like this slide is, what I like to do is show people all the different varieties of type of content. And but actually, to answer the question, how does our audience consume content? You really have to ask people. You have to get to know them. You have to know what their preferences are. There's no silver lining tick box that everyone's the same, and we can just produce a flyer for everyone in this certain age group who speaks this language. So what I'd say here, the main takeaway is just to think about how people consume content is varied. They can consume content in many, many different ways, and the best way to get an understanding is actually ask people. If you're speaking with trying to understand this information, and a person doesn't speak English or not well, engage an interpreter to help gain these insights so that you can figure out what their support needs are, what are their information preferences. But just keep this in the back of your mind. It's not just around written documents. It could be audio, it could be digital, it could be written, it could be just getting an SMS on your phone every week, what's happening this week, or a calendar of events, what's happening in our aged care home, what's happening. I just want to know, and that could be through an SMS. It could be a letter, a physical letter. It could be a poster that you see posted up somewhere. So just main takeaway here is to go and speak to your audience, and they're the ones who are going to inform what content you produce. So, like I said, once you know what your audience preferences are, it's actually really simple. If someone says, I love reading printed materials and I have absolutely no interest in using a mobile phone, well, if you start sending them SMS messages every week or sharing digital social media tiles, you're not meeting their needs. So really simple here is produce the content that your audience consumes. I know it sounds really simplified, but produce the content that your audience consumes. So again, here are some examples: written content, brochures, booklets, posters, easy read. Easy read I'll get into in the next few slides and what that actually looks like. Plain language fact sheets. Fridge magnets, fantastic. How many fridge magnets have I seen on my grandparents' fridges? And they're just a great source of an information, who to call at a certain point in time. Direct mail outs or letters mailed out to people. Website content, e-learning for specific audiences can be really engaging. Mobile applications, we've worked on some great multilingual mobile apps over the years. Video content, so that could be animated explainer videos or instructional videos, online courses. And we talk about subtitled versus voiceover. And why that's important is not everyone is that speaks a language is actually literate in their language, and which is why, again, it's really important to ask your audience how they consume content. And audio content, so you can actually produce audio files that can be shared through communities, radio ads if you wanted to be doing some broadcast, podcast episodes. The world's your oyster here. Just think about the different types of content. What I would say is there has always been an interest in fact sheets that haven't gone away, brochures, flyers, booklets, but we are seeing a lot more over the years, people venturing into different formats to meet the information needs of their audience. So one really important topic that I like to talk about is communication frequency and channels. And so the best way I can explain this is think about yourself and how you consume content. Do you just pick up your phone every day and you go to one website and that's where you get your information from and that's it? Because it's unlikely to be the case. You might get sent a message from your family telling you about something that's happened in the world. They're sharing an article. It might be a digital format. You might be scrolling through Facebook and see some content that's of relevance to you. You might be thinking, oh, I want to find out more about this specific topic, and you go look it up online. You might get an SMS about a new offer at your favorite online store. You might be driving to work and be listening to the radio. The point here is that people don't just receive information through one means. They typically do receive information through a variety. And so it's really important when we think about translation that we also think about the individual, and the individual gets the information in a variety of ways. They might like to be updated with an SMS once a week. They might like to see a poster when they walk down the corridor with some information for them. They like to receive a letter once a month in their language. So it's frequency, how often do you do this, and across which channels. So the main takeaway here again is just to think about your user, your audience, your consumer. They're a person and they function like a person. They consume content in a variety of ways, daily, weekly, monthly, and therefore what we deliver to them must meet these needs as well. And so this is probably where people say it's their favorite part of the webinar, which is where I show you some examples, and because it's visual and it gets the creative juices flowing in the brain. So I just wanted to show you a few different examples of some work, just to give you some ideas. So these are what we call animated videos. The great thing about animated explainer videos is that anything can be created. If you want a unicorn jumping off the moon in your video, it can be done. Someone will create that. Compared to, I don't know how you get a unicorn to exist, and I don't know how you get it up into the moon. But with a video, you can't, a videographer, a film crew, they can't go and do that, of course. So an animated video is engaging. From a lot of the community feedback we received, it can be translated into a variety of languages really easily. So you can create one video and have that translated into 5 or 10 languages. You can create your characters to be culturally diverse. You don't need to worry about talent sourcing. So how are we going to find people to represent each different cultural group that we want in the video, which can be a logistical challenge. And it can be done COVID safe, which became really apparent in the past 12 months because people started doing a lot of, instead of doing filming, they were doing a lot of animated work because it could be done in a studio. So what I'm showing you here is 2 different examples. One is with subtitles. So this is where what's seen on the screen is actually the visual representation of the audio. But in this case, it might just be that the audio is in English and they've just made the subtitles available in Vietnamese or in Greek or Italian or simplified Chinese. So this is a little bit different to on-screen text. On-screen text is where actual elements of the video itself are translated as well. You can do a combination, it's not a problem, but it's just an important part to distinguish here, which is that subtitles and on-screen text are visual elements that are translated. And don't always mean that the audio is also translated. Why this is important to distinguish is because of cost. To do something like this, where it just involves a translation, a visual translation, it's more cost effective than translating a script and getting a voice talent to record that in language and then have that produced in the video. The downside to this type of approach with just subtitles is actually that not everyone, like I said earlier, actually reads their language. They may have left school in primary school and they never had got the opportunity to finish their schooling, and therefore they speak their language. It's just that they don't read their language or they're not very proficient. And so that's one of the reasons why people actually make audio in videos accessible, because it actually increases the accessibility of that video for the audience. So here's an actual video, a video that we worked on for the Disability Royal Commission. This video is in Tagalog, and I'll just show you 30 seconds because you don't need to watch the whole 40 minutes to get a sense of it. But this actual video includes the on-screen text. They didn't actually elect for subtitles in this case, but it does have the translated audio, so the voiceover, and you will hear that in a moment. So here we go.
Isang may kapansanan na nakakaranas ng karahasan kung saan ikaw ay pisikal na sinasaktan ng isang tao, pang-aabuso kung saan ikaw ay tinatrato ng masama ng isang tao, kapabayaan kung saan ikaw ay hindi tinutulungan ng isang tao.
All right, so as you can see in this video, like I said, it's the audio that's been translated, and you saw that there was on-screen text as well that had been translated. Of course, this video was really well received by the community of Filipino speakers in the country who live with disability or family members who are looking to share their story with the Disability Royal Commission, which of course is critical at this point in time. Of course, there is a Q&A at the end of this session as well. So if you do have any questions that have come up throughout, I will be answering them at the end of this session. So the next example I wanted to show you is an example of a plain language fact sheet. This is also called plain English, but we call it plain language, and many call it plain language because it's not just plain English. As you can see, we've got plain Vietnamese or plain Chinese. We don't actually call them that. We just call them as a collective plain language. So plain language is essentially uses a lot of short and simple, clear writing. We've all been there. We've gone to a government website and it's been written in real government speak. It's very hard to understand. And plain language is pitched at a more lower reading level, so it's more accessible for people regardless of their level of English skills or their literacy, and it makes that more accessible for everyone in the community. And for most people in the community prefer plain language resources because it's just simplified. It's not government speak. It's not doctor speak. It's not legal speak. It's just written plain, simple, clear, easy to understand. An example here as well, I just wanted to point out, is that for this plain language fact sheet that we worked on for Jean Hales for Women's Health, we actually also swapped out the images for each language fact sheet so that they represented the target language group for each of the fact sheets. So there's not just, a photo of an Anglo-Saxon person on each fact sheet, regardless of the language. We can actually, when you're the audience, you can actually see it's in your language and you're seeing someone who you may relate to in some way, or you can feel like represents you in that visual. So easy read. I did mention this a little bit earlier. And so what is easy read? So this is again a translation that we worked on for the Australian Electoral Commission. Easy read was originally developed for as a resource for people with disability. It's very simplified messaging with visual elements attached to each written component. So as you can see in this middle image here, we have like one line with an image written very, very at a very low level to make it really accessible and easy for people to understand. Like I said, it was originally developed for people with disability, but because it's actually been so well received in the disability community, it's actually started to branch out into other areas, including for older people and people with low literacy in general, and people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds as well. And it's actually used as a tool to help people, even like as an example, we were speaking with some people in the sector who said that they actually share easy read English documents with people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds to help them learn English, because it's really simple and it's got a visual element. So, I understand that word in my language. It's helping me learn my English as well and develop my English skills. Again, here's an example of a easy read translation that we worked on for helping older people feel safe for the WA Police. Here's an example of fact sheets for the older persons hotline, a great initiative that the CCDA is spearheading. Again, here some images that are different for each language resource. So again, making it really clear, call this number to gain access to someone who speaks your language that you can talk about on the hotline. Websites, we do websites, again, dependent on the literacy, so the digital literacy of your audience. Websites can be a great tool. And we do actually have a webinar coming up here at Ethnolink next Tuesday, specifically on making best practice tips for multilingual websites and some different approaches that you can take for making information available on websites in different languages. Social media tiles. So Again, social media tiles can be really, really useful for people who particularly are on social platforms or use messaging platforms to share simple, easy messages or content. So here are some examples of social media tiles around coronavirus. So even without knowing what the tile on the left says, if you don't speak or read Chinese, you can actually tell it's saying something to the effect of keep 1.5 meters or keep some distance or socially distance. It's a visual element, it's some words, a small amount of words. The next one you can see again, don't touch your eyes, nose or mouth. So social media tiles, again, just a real simple, clear message in language provided for a digitally literate audience. Again, like I said, we work on some campaigns that involve audio, including an example here of a Burmese ad that was played on community radio. So I'll play just a very small snippet of this just so you can get an idea of what it sounds like. So again, you can hear that what we went through for this project was actually translating the English script into a number of languages, including Burmese, then also getting that recorded in language, as well as layering that with some background music, so it would be suitable for on a radio, community radio program. So how do we get our content in front of our audience, and how do we get it there? Now, this is going to depend, how you approach this might be really simple in depending on your circumstances and your organization. If you know you're trying to deliver certain content to specific people, then it's quite simple for you. You can go and get that to them or disseminate it through whatever channel that could be, dropping it off in their letterbox or at their door, putting posters up in common areas. It could be sending out an SMS or an email to them as well, in a smaller fashion. However, if you're trying to do something at a national level or at a state level or a local council area level, can be a little bit different, because how do we actually get this out in front of people? So here are a few different avenues that you can go for this to achieve this. The first is through partnerships and actually through your community engagement initiatives to engage with multicultural organisations that exist at a local, state and federal level who can help to disseminate your information. It could be through establishing relationships with ethno-specific organisations who can help you target a specific cultural group who speak specific languages. It could be through digital channels if you have an email database. And this is, like I said earlier, about if you start collecting data, it can be really useful. If you have a database of 1,000 people and their preferred language, you can actually do email campaigns to send emails out to people who speak specific languages or read specific languages, and that can be really useful. Social media. Again, you can be through organic social media, through sharing that content through your channels that you have. It could be through paid social media ads as well. But also a really interesting concept not many people think about is actually, I like to think of it as infiltrating or connecting or engaging with local Facebook groups that exist. Like there's Italians in Melbourne Facebook group, where a group of Italians speakers, people who have come from Italy, have joined this group, and it's localized, it's in an area, and it's with a specific group of people. And if you can actually engage with those types of groups, you can spread your message through those channels as well. There's a fantastic site and resource called healthtranslations.vic.gov.au, which has a huge array, the largest database of health information in many languages. Whilst it is a Victorian government initiative operated by the Centre for Ethnicity and Health, in health. It's actually a national resource as well. So it's got resources from all across the country. You can have physical channels, so whether that's letterbox drops or posters within the community or local libraries, local newspapers, as well as ethnic media or multicultural media, different outlets who can help with specific target audiences. And by engaging with them, sometimes it could be through, they may have some opportunities for PR or press release or organic sharing of content through that media channel, but also through paid initiatives, paid media placements on those channels, be that radio, newspapers, or digital online publications. Cool. So I said at the start, it was so important that we actually define our objectives so well. And that's because if you've defined your objective well and you've set up mechanisms throughout the way to measure the effectiveness of your translations, then you can actually, you can do some measurement of that at the end of the campaign or at the end of the time period. So if you've said that you wanted to increase cold consumer satisfaction with your aged care services by 20% by December 2022, you can actually build the structures. Like, how are we actually going to figure this out? We need to have a benchmark. Are we measuring that satisfaction now? This is completely hypothetical, but you can get the picture here. What's the benchmark now? When are we going to be taking this survey? How are we going to be taking this survey moving forward? Were we going to do that as in terms of a survey, paper survey, digital survey, a face-to-face survey? Could be anecdotal evidence, scale 1 to 10. How often we're going to take that? How we're going to measure that moving forward? But once we've actually developed our objective and our audience, we figured out who our audience is and what we're trying to achieve, we can actually measure this as time goes on, so long as we're collecting data and we have thought about how we're going to evaluate at the end of that process. Some final questions I'd like to finish off with before we move into the Q&A that we get quite often. So I like to deliver this early on before Q&A is some of the quick common questions we get. So how do I make the most of my translation budget? Now, we completely understand here at Ethnolink that money doesn't grow on trees. People are operating in a very challenging environment with challenging funding, challenging budget. And so what we really need to do is make sure that we're getting value for money with our translations, that we are making the most of that. So here are some really, really simple tips to help you get the most out of your budget. To first explain what drives pricing, which then helps inform the tips. The first and foremost thing you should know is what drives pricing essentially is the word count, how many words you need to translate. And it's really quite simple. If you ask someone to translate 1 million words, or you ask someone just to translate 100 words, of course, 1 million words is going to cost a lot more than 100 words. So the tip here is to cut the fluff, reduce your word count, and writing in plain language, or really thinking deeply, what's the core information we need people to know, and actually showing some rigor around and some restraint to not just develop a resource that's 50 pages long that many people will never read, but actually just to develop that in a shorter format will help to reduce your translation costs. Also, like I said, consider easy read and plain language to help with that. The next thing that drives pricing is urgency. So as you can imagine, professional NAATI certified translators are professionals. And so if someone comes to them and says, hey, I need this translated today, they have to stop everything. They have to drop what they're doing, what other work they're engaged in, or in some cases working overnight, working on the weekends to get this urgent project done. So if you plan ahead, you'll actually avoid these urgency surcharges where people put a bit of a premium Just like if you had to call a plumber out on the weekend or on a Sunday or on a Christmas day, it's actually going to cost more. So if you can plan ahead, of course, it's not always possible given the circumstances, but if you can plan ahead, that will help to reduce your costs as well. The next is typesetting. And what this basically means is a beautiful brochure. It's not created like that from day one. Of course, you get a graphic designer to develop that. So to actually typeset it, which means to lay out the text in that design file, is a skill and takes time. And translators typically do not do this work, which means we have to get basically a graphic design specialist who works in different languages to lay out this text. So the tip here is if you're struggling for budget, is to try to produce a Word document format if it's a written resource. A Word format is going to be far more accessible, far more budget friendly compared to other formats. So languages as well, unfortunately, supply and demand. So some rarer languages, the translators are just overwhelmed with the amount of work. So obviously they have higher rates. So certain languages are more, more cost effective. It's a sad reality of the world. That is the world we live in, unfortunately. But I'm not saying here to discard certain languages just because they are, more expensive. But it's just a reality to think about. If you want to, sometimes you can do 10 languages or you can do 5, just depending on the languages that you choose. So, how should I get content translated? Well, a translation company like us, that's what we do for a living. That's what we've been doing for 10 years. You can also work with NATI certified translators directly. One thing to note though is a translation company like us, we project manage across 150 languages. So we manage multilingual projects in that manner across different formats as well, with quality assurance processes in place. Whereas working directly with a translator, you're not going to have that same level of involvement. And a question we get all the time, machine translation, can we use this? Should we use this? Strong recommendation is no, not at this point in time. It's certainly not where it needs to be, particularly when it's on such critical information. But simple things like maybe how do I say hello to someone in their language? It can be okay. You can still get things wrong sometimes, like gender and things like this. But definitely, please do not process your documents through machine translation. It can lead to some very funny things, but also some really offensive things as well, which I certainly don't wish upon anyone. Should I test my translations with the community? This is where effectively you actually go and get your translated material and you go to take it to that community or a member of that community who speaks the language and say, hey, what do you think? Is this clear? Do you understand this? It could be that the translation's correct and accurate, but there's something about it that, it might not be culturally appropriate. The resource might have said, limit your intake of, limit how much bread you eat. But in certain people from certain cultures, they might not eat bread. They might eat rice or they might eat pasta. So it might be more relevant to adapt that content so it's a bit further to meet the needs of that cultural group. So that's why you should do community testing. That's something that we do here at Ethnolink, but also some of our clients like to take that process on themselves and get feedback from either bilingual staff members or their consumers and really test those products on them. And that is all. Thank you so much. And we will move into the Q&A session of today's webinar. I'm just going to have a look here at the questions that are coming through on the chat. So why are some languages more expensive than others? So essentially the way that it works is, I'll give you a real world example. There are thousands of Chinese translators in Australia. So the supply of translators is high and then they all want work. And so therefore they, free market economics means that they will fight for that work, not physically, of course, metaphorically. It means that they're competitive for that work in any competitive market. Whereas a language like Samoan, there are 2 certified translators in the whole country, 2 translators to service the whole country for Samoan, right? So of course, they are overwhelmed with work, and therefore, when they're overwhelmed, they have to prioritize. And it's sort of who can pay the most, or I have a limited amount of time. I need to make sure that I'm getting remunerated appropriately for my work. That's essentially why there are differences with language prices. We try to keep them, for the most part, very, very much the same. It's just in some cases with incredibly languages that are incredibly high demand with a very short supply of NADI certified professional translators, where you will see a bit of a disparity.
It is quite a complex concept, isn't it? Translations. It's not just a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about considering the nuances of each person and each community, and also to talk to organisations and consult with organisations in the aged care sector around how to program and plan for effective translations from the top down, from the board level to finance, to budgeting, to service delivery, and in consumer engagement mechanisms. So it's actually relevant to a whole of organisation approach, and that was what clearly came through strategic thinking and strategic planning, was what you mentioned, Costa. So thank you so much for that presentation, and just for the audience to let you know that you can come to the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing to get advice around how to plan for effective translations within your service, and to how to help your consumers, even if it's just that one consumer that's by themselves within your service. I think we did have a comment about that, around the person being the only person that has an English as an additional language in their service. And so we encourage you to speak to Costa about that, around a budget for that person. Sometimes it might be translating a lifestyle calendar, or translating important information that you might want specific to your organisation to that one person. So I guess Costa could, or other translation providers can give you a quote. On top of that, just to let you know that the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing has our consumer feedback forms in 12 languages available on our website. So all you need to do is put your logo into those consumer feedback forms if you wanted to embed that into your organisation. So we've got a bit more time, and I thought maybe we would focus on a little bit about the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing website. So if you go to the website, there is a range of multilingual resources there as well for you to access about a range of topics to do with aged care. So our website is funded by the Department of Health, and it's for a national audience, and it is a hub of information for the aged care sector, and it is constantly updated as well. So if you go to that multilingual resource section, you'll see a range of topics that you could use for your consumers. And here are some of the topics here, so I won't go into it too much. And we know that My Aged Care has quite a lot of information, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages, which is very impressive. And before we end the session, I thought I'd highlight our Inclusive Service Standards online portal. And that's where you get a lot of information about inclusive practice at large. We have self-assessment tools, we have our tips and templates, and of course our reading room and invitations for good practice across the sector. So it is a free resource. So we encourage everyone to at least register for the portal so you can get access to the resources, and there's a link there as well. And this is an overview of some of the tip sheets and templates that you can get on the portal. So diversity inclusion training topics, links to the inclusive service standards that we have here at the centre, and some templates around a diversity inclusion policy for your organisation, and other templates. And of course, this webinar is a part of our monthly webinar series. And so the first two are already uploaded on our website, so you can listen to the recordings and access the PowerPoint presentations and other resources. And of course, so this presentation today will be uploaded within the next couple of weeks. So visit the site and you'll be able to get the Costa's actual PowerPoint presentation as well as the recording. And here are the future topics. So if you're interested in any of these, feel free to register, because we have unlimited registrations on Zoom, so you can register for any of them. And I thought I'd also like to highlight our conference. So on the 17th of June, we have our mini conference online between 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. Melbourne time. And our theme this year is Hearing the Voices of Older People. Do we care to communicate? in line with the idea of language services, in line with effective translations, in line with the idea of inclusive consumer feedback, to the aged care reform, to changes happening within aged care, to an improved aged care system. How do we listen to people who have language barriers? Or where are the barriers located, within the system or the person? And we are strongly leaning towards the system having barriers there. And that's what the conference will be highlighting. And of course, we have our Excellence Awards. So we've just launched our Excellence Awards on our website. Applications close on the 30th of May. So we'd like to always celebrate good practice. So we have 3 awards: Excellence in Organisational Leadership, Excellence in Service Delivery, and of course, our Individual Excellence Award by our patron, Dr. Olga Kanitsaki. And she's been part of the Centre for a while, and she's an amazing supporter of this work. And so if you wanted to nominate anyone or any organisation, feel free to do that. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time today. Just letting you know that Tanina has sent you the link for our survey. Please fill out the survey. The reason for that is because this is part of a massive evaluation report to the Department of Health. The Royal Commission report recommendations recommended diversity training to be something that we can incorporate within the aged care sector. So the more information we can get up to the department, the better. So we really appreciate if you can fill out that survey. Thank you so much, Costa, again, for your expertise, subject matter expertise, for who you are, for being a great human being. And thank you, everyone, for your attendance. And I will see you at the next webinar, hopefully. Thank you.